In this video, I want to talk about 5 misinterpreted traits that might actually suggest a non-autistic personality profile. Have you ever looked at your partner's behavior and thought, this has to be autism, only to feel confused because some pieces fit and other pieces really don't? Maybe they avoid eye contact. Maybe they shut down any emotional conversations. Maybe they seem painfully literal, overly sensitive, socially awkward, defensive, avoidant, or emotionally unavailable. And once autism enters the conversation, it can become the lens through which everything is interpreted. But here's an important distinction we need to make today. Not every behavior that looks autistic is actually autism. Sometimes what looks like a neurodevelopmental difference may actually be severe social anxiety. Sometimes it may be chronic hypervigilance. Sometimes it might be trauma adaptation. It could also be a nervous system that learned early in life that people are unpredictable, criticism is dangerous, conflict is unsafe, and emotional exposure leads to pain. And when we confuse trauma-based protection with autism-based wiring, we may use the wrong tools. And this is where relational progress stalls. So this video is not about diagnosing your partner from a distance. It's not about dismissing autism either. It's not about saying, well, they're definitely not autistic. No, only a qualified professional doing a full assessment can sort that out responsibly. What we are going to do today is clarify the diagnostic fog. Because in neurodiverse relationships, one of the most painful mistakes couples can make is assuming that every relational difficulty comes from autism, when some of those patterns may be coming from anxiety, shame, fear, attachment wounds, social trauma, or long-term emotional self-protection. So today, we're going to look at 5 commonly misinterpreted traits that might actually suggest a non-autistic personality profile, especially when those traits are driven by hypervigilance rather than neurological deficit. And the key phrase is might suggest. Not prove, not confirm, not diagnose, suggest. Because good clinical thinking is not about jumping to conclusions, it's about asking better questions. So let's begin. The first misinterpreted trait is avoiding eye contact. This is one of the most commonly recognized traits associated with autism. Many autistic people find eye contact uncomfortable, distracting, overstimulating, unnatural, or even physically intense. For some, looking into another person's eyes makes it harder to process speech. For others, it simply doesn't carry the same intuitive social meaning that neurotypical people assign to it. But eye contact avoidance can also come from social anxiety and trauma. A socially anxious person may avoid eye contact because they feel exposed. They may fear being judged, criticized, rejected, evaluated, or seen too much. Their nervous system may interpret direct gaze as scrutiny. To them, eye contact doesn't merely feel uncomfortable, it feels risky. A trauma-adapted person may avoid eye contact because direct gaze has historically been associated with danger. Maybe a parent's stare meant anger was coming. Maybe authority figures used eye contact as intimidation. Maybe being emotionally visible led to shame, punishment, or humiliation. So on the surface, the behavior may look the same. The person doesn't want to make much eye contact. But underneath, the reason may be very different. In autism, the person may not naturally use eye contact as a primary communication channel. In trauma or social anxiety, the person may understand exactly what eye contact means, but they may avoid it because it makes them feel vulnerable, evaluated, or unsafe, and that distinction matters. Because if the issue is autism, the helpful approach may be to reduce unnecessary demands for eye contact and focus on alternative ways of connecting. But if the issue is social anxiety or trauma, the work may involve shame reduction, emotional safety, gradual exposure, nervous system regulation, relational trust building. In other words, the question is not simply, do they avoid eye contact? The better question is, what happens inside them when eye contact occurs? Do they seem confused by the social function of eye contact? Or do they seem afraid of being judged? Do they avoid eye contact across contexts, or mainly during conflict, criticism, intimacy, or emotionally loaded conversations? Do they look away because it helps them think, or because they feel exposed? That difference can completely change the therapeutic direction. The second misinterpreted trait is emotional shutdown during conflict. In many neurodiverse relationships, one partner may describe the other as going blank, freezing, disappearing internally, becoming robotic, leaving the room, refusing to answer, suddenly losing access to words. Now, this can look very much like autistic shutdown, especially if the person becomes overwhelmed by emotional intensity, multiple verbal demands, sensory stress, or rapid relational processing. Autistic shutdown is real. It can happen when the brain and nervous system become overloaded. The person may not be choosing silence. They may genuinely lose the ability to respond in that moment, and pressuring them harder can make things worse. But emotional shutdown can also be a trauma response. A person with chronic hypervigilance may shut down because conflict feels threatening. Their body may interpret a difficult conversation as danger, even when no one is actually unsafe. Their nervous system may move into freeze, collapse, appeasement, dissociation, or emotional numbing. And this is where the overlap becomes tricky. Both people may stop talking. Both may look detached. Both may seem emotionally unavailable. Both may say, "I don't know," or "I can't do this," or "I need to get away." But the internal mechanism may differ. An autistic shutdown may be more related to cognitive overload, sensory overload, emotional processing overload, or difficulty integrating too much information too quickly. A trauma shutdown may be more related to threat detection, fear of punishment, shame, abandonment, terror, or learned helplessness. Now here's a useful clinical clue. Look at what triggers the shutdown. Does it happen when there are too many words, too much ambiguity, too much emotional intensity, too many simultaneous demands, or sudden changes in expectation? That may point more toward neurodivergent overload. Or does it appear to happen primarily when the person senses disappointment, anger, criticism, rejection, or the possibility of being in trouble? That may point more toward trauma-based hypervigilance. Again, we're not diagnosing here, we're differentiating. Because if you assume every shutdown is autistic overload, you may only focus on reducing stimulation, simplifying language, or giving processing time. Those may help, but if the root is trauma, that's not going to be enough. The deeper work may need to include helping the person learn conflict is not the same as danger. Disagreement is not the same as abandonment. My partner's pain is not proof that I'm bad. I can stay present without being destroyed. That is a very different kind of repair. Now, the third misinterpreted trait is literal thinking or missing emotional meaning. This one creates enormous confusion in relationships. A partner may say, "You never hear what I'm really saying. You respond to the words, but you miss the emotional message underneath." And that can certainly happen in autism. Some autistic people process language more concretely. They may miss implied meaning, indirect emotional cues, hints, subtext, sarcasm, or relational nuance unless it is clearly stated. But literal responding can also happen when someone is anxious, defensive, or hypervigilant. When a person is in threat mode, the brain narrows. It stops listening for connection and starts scanning for accusation. It becomes less flexible, less curious, less emotionally spacious. It may latch onto exact words because exact words feel safer than emotional meaning. For example, one partner says, "I feel like I'm alone in this marriage." The anxious or hypervigilant partner responds, "That's not true. I was home all weekend." Now, on the surface, that looks literal. It looks like they missed the emotional meaning. But what may actually be happening is defensive threat processing. They hear, "You're failing me," and their nervous system panics. So instead of responding to the loneliness, they respond to the accusation they believe is hidden inside the statement. That's not necessarily a lack of theory of mind, which is associated with autism. It may be fear. It may be shame. It may be a nervous system trying to avoid blame. Now, here's the difference. In autism, the person may genuinely not infer the emotional subtext unless it is made explicit. In hypervigilance, the person may infer too much threat. They're not missing subtext because they can't detect it. They're misreading subtext because their threat system is exaggerating danger, and that's a huge distinction. One person may need clearer, more direct communication because ambiguity is confusing. The other may need help tolerating emotional discomfort without turning every vulnerable statement into a courtroom defense. So the question becomes, are they underreading emotional meaning or overreading threat? That one question can unlock a lot. Because if a partner is autistic, autism-informed communication might include being more explicit, reducing hints, using direct language, checking for understanding. But if a partner is trauma reactive, the intervention may be different. Slow down defensiveness, build shame resilience, practice reflective listening, and help the person separate my partner has a feeling from I am being attacked. The fourth misinterpreted trait is social awkwardness or isolation. A person may avoid gatherings, dislike small talk, struggle to maintain friendships, seem uncomfortable in groups, avoid phone calls, prefer staying home. Now, these behaviors are often associated with autism, right? Especially when social communication differences have been present since childhood. But social withdrawal can also come from severe social anxiety. The socially anxious person may deeply understand social expectations. In fact, they may understand them too much. They may constantly monitor tone, facial expression, pauses, body language, facial micro reactions, the possible signs of disapproval. They may replay conversations for hours. They may worry they sounded stupid, rude, boring, needy, arrogant, weird, or too much. Their social difficulty is not necessarily a lack of social awareness. It may be an excess of self-monitoring. That's why socially anxious people can appear socially skilled in short bursts, but feel utterly exhausted afterward. They may perform normalcy very well, but internally they are tracking everything. Autistic masking can also be exhausting, of course. So again, we need nuance here. So the question is not, do they struggle socially? The question is, what kind of struggle is it? Does the person struggle because they don't intuitively read social skills? They don't automatically know what's expected? Or they feel confused by group dynamics? Yeah, that may suggest autism. Or do they understand the rules but fear failing at them? Do they replay social moments obsessively? Do they constantly worry about others' opinions? Do they avoid people because they expect judgment? That may suggest social anxiety or trauma-based hypervigilance. Another clue is developmental history. Autism is neurodevelopmental. That means signs are typically present early in life, even if they were missed, hidden, compensated for, or misunderstood. Now, trauma and social anxiety may also begin early, but they often intensify around specific relational experiences. For example, bullying, humiliation, criticism, family instability, rejection, betrayal, chronic emotional invalidation. So if a person says, well, I used to feel socially comfortable, but after years of criticism, rejection, and relational pain, I kind of started avoiding people. That may point more toward anxiety, trauma, or protective withdrawal. On the other hand, if they say, well, I've always felt like other people were operating from a social rule book that I never received, that may point more towards autism. Both experiences deserve compassion, but they don't always need the same tools. Now, the fifth misinterpreted trait is rigidity and control. This is one of the most painful traits in relationships. One partner may say, everything has to be their way. They can't tolerate change. They need routines. They get upset if plans shift. They correct details. They resist spontaneity. They seem controlling. Well, in autism, rigidity may be connected to predictability, executive functioning, demands, sensory regulation, intolerance of uncertainty, cognitive inflexibility, or the need to reduce overwhelm. Routines can be stabilizing. Predictability can make the world more manageable. Change may not simply be annoying, it may be neurologically destabilizing. But rigidity can also come from trauma. A hypervigilant person may control details because uncertainty feels unsafe. They may become rigid because they're trying to prevent emotional danger. They may need things done a certain way because chaos once led to pain. They may resist spontaneity because the unknown activates fear. The outside behavior may be similar. I need to know the plan. But inside, the story is different. For an autistic person, the plan may help reduce cognitive and sensory overload. For a trauma-adapted person, the plan may help reduce threat and emotional uncertainty. In relationships, this distinction matters because the partner on the receiving end may feel dominated either way. They may feel like there's no room for their preferences, their spontaneity, their emotion, or humanity. So the goal is not to excuse rigidity. The goal is to understand its function. For example, is the rigidity about regulation, predictability, and processing? Or Is it about fear, mistrust, and preventing imagined catastrophe? A trauma-based rigid person may actually become more flexible when they feel emotionally safe. Their control softens as trust increases. They may be able to say, okay, I'm scared something will go wrong, or I feel out of control right now, or I need reassurance. On the other hand, an autistic person may also become more flexible with support, but they still need structure, preparation, transition time, and sensory accommodations, and clear expectations because the nervous system and cognitive processing demands remain real. Again, different roots, different tools. Now, let's pull these 5 traits together. Eye contact avoidance, emotional shutdown, literal responses, social withdrawal, rigidity. All 5 can show up in autism. All 5 can also show up in severe social anxiety, chronic hypervigilance, trauma adaptation, attachment injury, or shame-based self-protection. And this is why couples can get stuck. One partner reads the behavior through an autism lens and thinks, well, they can't help it. I need to accommodate this. The other partner may feel relief because the label explains the behavior, but the deeper wound may remain untouched. Or the opposite happens. One partner rejects the autism possibility entirely and says, no, you're just selfish, avoidant, controlling, emotionally immature, narcissistic, and so on. That is also too simplistic. The truth may be more nuanced and layered. A person can be autistic and traumatized. A person can have ADHD and social anxiety. A person can be neurotypical and deeply defended. A person can have learned survival strategies that look like neurodivergent traits. A person can mask trauma so effectively that everyone mistakes fear for personality. So the goal is not to replace one label with another. The goal is to ask, what is driving this behavior? Is this a skill deficit? A processing difference? Maybe a sensory overload response? Maybe a social communication difference? A nervous system defense? Maybe it's a fear response or a shame response or an attachment strategy. Because the why determines the tool. If the issue is autism-related processing, the couple may need direct communication, reduced ambiguity, sensory awareness, transition time, explicit expectations, written assignments, and autism-informed relational strategy. But if the issue is trauma-based hypervigilance, the couple may need nervous system safety, trauma therapy, shame work, attachment repair, conflict de-escalation, exposure to healthy disagreement, and skills for staying present without collapse or attacking. Now, if the issue is severe social anxiety, the work may include gradually reducing avoidance, challenging fear-based predictions, practicing social tolerance, and building confidence in imperfect human connection. And if multiple things are true, the tools must be integrated. This is why differential diagnosis matters so much. Not because a label fixes everything, it doesn't. But the wrong label can send a couple down the wrong road. And that's not a good program. So if you treat trauma as autism, you may over-accommodate avoidance and never address fear. If you treat autism as trauma, you may pressure someone to heal something that is actually part of their neurological wiring. If you treat social anxiety as selfishness, you may increase shame and make the person even more avoidant. If you treat emotional shutdown as intentional cruelty, you may miss the nervous system collapse underneath. And if you treat every relational wound as a diagnosis, you may forget that the relationship still needs accountability, repair, empathy, boundaries, and change. So where do you go from here? Start with curiosity, not certainty. Instead of asking, are they autistic or not? Ask, what pattern do we see across time, context, development, and stress? Look at childhood history. Look at sensory patterns. Look at social understanding. Look at flexibility when safe. Look at whether the person misses emotional information or fears emotional information. Look at whether their shutdown comes from overload, shame, threat, or all 3. And most importantly, look at what actually helps. Does autism-informed strategies create real improvement? Or does the relationship remain stuck because fear, trauma, shame, and defensiveness are still running the show? Does trauma-informed strategies help the person become more present, flexible, and emotionally available? Or do those strategies fall short because there are genuine neurological processing differences that need accommodation? Progress comes from matching the tool to the root. And for the partner watching this who feels exhausted, confused, and maybe even guilty for wondering, what if we got this wrong? That question doesn't make you cruel, it just makes you thoughtful. The invitation is not shame. The invitation is clarity. Because whether the root is autism, anxiety, trauma, or some combination of all three, the goal is not blame. The goal is a relationship where both people are seen more accurately, supported more wisely, and held accountable more fairly. So here's the key takeaway. A behavior can look autistic without being autism. A trauma response can look like a personality trait. Hypervigilance can look like social awkwardness. Shame can look like defensiveness. Fear can look like rigidity. And emotional self-protection can look like disconnection. But when we slow down and ask better questions, the fog begins to clear. And when the fog clears, couples stop wasting energy using tools that don't fit the problem. And they can finally begin the right work. Not necessarily easier work, but more accurate work. And more accurate work is where real progress begins. Now, if this topic resonated with you, take a moment to consider which of these 5 traits has created the most confusion in your relationship. Eye contact, shutdown, literal responses, social withdrawal, or rigidity. Then ask this question gently. Is this coming from wiring, fear, overload, shame, or learned protection? That one question may not solve everything, but it can change the direction of the conversation. And sometimes changing the direction is the first real breakthrough. Please like, subscribe, and comment. I will read and respond to your comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Would you like to schedule a paid private coaching session? This will be in the form of a face-to-face Zoom call. Underneath any of my videos, you'll see this Calendly link. If you click on that link, it'll open up my calendar. You can pick the available days and times that works for your schedule. You'll get a follow-up email immediately after purchasing a session that will have the Zoom link that coincides with the day and time that you picked. I will get an email too that you scheduled a session, and I will be available on that exact day and time, and we will talk. I look forward to working with you.